Now we're going into the last biggie portion of this presentation, and that's other local government comprehensive plan types. That's evaluation and appraisal review, which I mentioned earlier, as well as developments that qualifies as DRI, sector planning, rural land stewardship areas, as well as other planning innovations, which we'll touch upon at the end of this presentation. Now, many of you may remember what was called the Evaluation and Appraisal Report, or EAR, prior to 2011. It was a beast of an amendment process. Originally, local governments had a list within the Florida statutes of things to go over in their comprehensive plans every 7 years to make sure they were compliant with state law. That usually took maybe a year or two of doing the data analysis, submitting the actual report itself, and then going through and creating what's called year-based amendments based on that data analysis. Things have changed since 2011. Now it is the evaluation and appraisal review. Now, the scheduling for an evaluation and appraisal review is still the same. It is still every 7 years, and it is guided by Rule 73C-49 of the Florida Administrative Code. Now, what's different is the documentation. Previously, when local governments had to do the evaluation and appraisal report, or EAR, they had to do a full-blown report, and it was data analysis and everything. And that served as your data analysis for your what was the EAR-based amendments that came from that report. And what that report basically did was it went over the entire comprehensive plan, whenever where changes were going to occur within the comprehensive plan, either because of state law, compliance, or the local government wanted to change their community vision. Now, when your time is up on the 7-year schedule for your local government, the local government just has to send a letter of notification or notification letter to DEO or DEO. In that notification letter, it could be just one page identifying whether or not they will go forward and make what's called year-based amendments that will revise your comprehensive plan. Or they may just identify in that letter they will not do that, that they're compliant with state law. The letter just has to identify whether or not they are compliant with state law and whether or not they were going forward and doing their year-based amendments. The letter could be 1 or 2 pages. Some local governments decide to go through and do the entire report, so they just get the data analysis done with. But it must be noted that when a local government indicates to DEO that they will be doing year-based amendments, they must submit those amendments within 1 year after submitting their notification letter to DEO. Now, the prohibition that's associated with years slightly different, but in some ways the same. If a local government does not submit this letter of notification about whether or not they're doing their year-based amendments, by the time the schedule comes up for them, they'll be unable to amend their comprehensive plan until they submit that letter. And there's a similar prohibition in regards also to year-based amendments. So please, when you're dealing with year-based amendments, adhere to the timelines that are within statute, so you're not prohibited from changing anything with your comprehensive plan. And I'd like to point out real quick before I leave the EAR, prior to 2011, there was guidance on what local governments should look at in regards to looking at the comprehensive plan for state compliance, as well as changing their vision and what have you. All of that guidance now has been removed from the Florida statute. So it is up to the local government to decide whether or not they are compliant with state law. Now, if a local government decides incorrectly whether or not they're compliant with state law and they submit a comprehensive plan amendment that is not in compliance because of their comprehensive plan. That's on the local government to try to fix that issue. Now, I'm going to skip this slide, really. I'm just going to touch upon it very quickly. I only want to generally talk about developments of regional impact, and essentially those developments that would qualify to be a DRI, as we discussed it earlier in the presentation. And the changes came because of Senate Bill 1216 this year, which basically changed what new DRIs, how they would be reviewed and what process they would go through. So I'm just going to skip over this right now, and we'll talk more about it for the Chapter 4 webinar, since we also discussed a little bit earlier. And I'm going to jump into sector plans. All right. Sector plans are the new big kid in the block, if you consider that. You may have heard of sector plans such as Division, Latchwell, or Plum Creek, Sugar Hill, Bay-Walton, and others. The majority of sector plans that you know about today have been developed and approved after 2011. So where did this program come from? Originally, it was a pilot program that was begun in 1998, which produced the state's 4 original sector plans. The grandfather in all was Horizon West. Now, in 2011, the pilot status for this program was moved by House Bill 7207, and it became a full-fledged program which anyone could do a sector plan underneath. Currently, there are 12 sector plans in existence or under development, of which 6 of those sector plans came in for state review in the last 2 years. One of which is an expansion of an existing sector plan that was called the West Bay Sector Plan. It is now called the Bay-Walton Sector Plan, and it covers 2 counties, which goes to show how big these sector plans can be. And I'd like to point out that it is over 110,000 acres, and this is currently the 2nd largest. Another one that's under development called the North Grand Sector Plan, I think will be over 170,000 acres. So they're pretty large. The intent of the sector plan program was to find an alternative to the DRI program. It was to encourage long-range planning and the conservation of natural resources. To be eligible for a sector plan program, it's kind of like getting on a roller coaster. You have to be of a certain height. For sector plans, you have to be of a certain size. Eligibility, you have to be at least 15,000 acres. And you could be within one jurisdiction, or like Bay-Walton, across multiple jurisdictions. Guidance and designation for sector plans is administered through DEO under Section 163.32.45 of Florida statute. Now, sector plans can be created one of 2 ways. There is what I would call a regular method. That regular method, and we'll get into the components of sector plans in a little bit, consists of the local government creating what's called a long-term master plan, which is one of 2 components of a sector plan. After they develop a long-term master plan, that goes through state review underneath the state coordinated review process and must be adopted into the local government comprehensive plan. Or if it crosses multiple jurisdictions, all counties or cities impacted by the sector plan. That is the regular method. Another method that was instituted for those that had large future land use map amendments that adhered to the criteria, including the size eligibility of a sector plan, were allowed to become sector plans in 2011, and those are called future land use map conversions. Essentially what happened is, when the sector plan program left its pilot status, the state wanted to give those who had a incredibly large future land use map amendments that could technically be underneath the sector plan program the ability to make those future land use map amendments to sector plans. And only 3 were done. That was, as you see on the slide, the East Nassau Community Plan. There's also Rodina and Hendry County. That was another example of flume conversion. And I cannot recall the third off the top of my head right now. But since then, you don't see flume conversions very much. You mostly see sector plans going the regular method. Now, as I alluded to, there's 2 major components of a sector plan. One is called a long-term master plan, and the other called the detailed specific area plan. The long-term master plan is considered the overarching framework for the entire sector plan. That piece is adopted into the comprehensive plan itself. It provides all the overarching goals, objectives, policies, location maps, everything. What detailed specific area plans, or DSAPs, do is they implement the long-term master plan. These are 1,000 acres or more, and they basically implement portions of the sector plan, and they're adopted by local development order. Since there's 2 main components of the sector plan there are 2 levels of review. As we were just talking about, the first level of review would be the state coordinator review for the long-term master plan itself. When reviewers are looking at the long-term master plan, they need to be looking at the requirements underneath Section 163, 3245(3)(a) of the Florida statute, which details what should be contained within a long-term master plan. And that includes not only the goals, objectives, policies, but also data analysis. The other level of review is when you get to the DSAP stage. DSAP, their requirements and review are found underneath Section 163, 3245(3)(f). Now, a change for a DSAP that happened this year is the review of a DSAP. Prior to 2015, the review of the DSAP was primarily through DO, and DO to coordinate with other state agencies, but DO was the only one to review a adopted or approved local development order for a DSAP. And
actually,
whether or not, sorry.
That was one of the changes in statute this year, is that all the commenting agencies.
Yeah,
so, okay.
I was just, sorry about that. I was just talking about what was prior to 2015. I didn't mean to confuse. Sorry, Maria. So essentially, prior to 2015, it was DAO looking at the DSAP as the approved local development order, and checking to ensure that it was consistent with the long-term master plan. As Maria was about to talk about, with changes in Senate Bill 1216 for December 2015, we now have a 30-day review period for reviewing agencies in regards to DSAP. And this is a little different, because instead of reviewing DAO, reviewing at the adopted local development order stage, when an applicant develops a proposed DSAP, they are required now to send their proposed DSAP application for review by reviewing agencies. That will include FDOT. So FDOT now has the ability underneath Florida statute to review a proposed DSAP and submit comments. And they must submit comments directly to local government within 30 days of receipt of the proposed DSAP. After that happens, the applicant must address the comments identified during the 30-day review period in their development of their final proposed DSAP application, which would then go to local government for approval. At that stage, it then goes back to what was happening originally prior to 2015, in which DAO would then be the recipient of the approved local development order, and what then they will review to see if it adheres to the long-term master plan, goals, objectives, policies, as well as internal consistency with the plan itself, like other state laws. And so,
if I can add a comment here, Janine.
Sure.
When we're reviewing the DSAP, we're limited to the review for consistency against the long-term master plan. And since the purpose of the sector plan is to replace the DRI process, one of the issues of concern to FDOT will be to look at those extra jurisdictional impacts to important state resources and facilities. So under the sector plan legislation, the requirements at the long-term master plan are fairly general. So the mitigation does not really happen until the detailed specific area plan is done. What's required at the long-term master plan is to generally identify the facilities and services needed to support the long-term master plan, and the sector plan needs to have procedures for working with and addressing those extra jurisdictional impacts. So it's critical that the long-term master plan establish a good set of procedures to work through and identify a process to work with the agencies to address those extra jurisdictional impacts, because again, the mitigation is not really required until you prepare the DSAP.
Thank you, Maria. And actually, before I leave this part, does anyone have questions on sector plans really quick? I'm going to jump and talk briefly then about rural land stewardship areas. This is another big program under growth management, which began in 2001. And this program was revised with House Bill 7207 in 2011 and was finally given its own guiding statute, which is Section 153-3248. Now, rural land stewardship areas are intended for predominantly rural areas for long-range planning purposes. For an area to be eligible to become a rural land stewardship area, it has to be at least 10,000 acres or more outside of any urban areas or any urban service areas. It must be designated by a plan amendment as an overlay. And just as a note, similar to sector plans, rural land stewardship areas can cross more than one county. Now, sector plan, no, my apologies. Rural land stewardship areas, the overlay amendment itself is initiated by the landowners and must be submitted for state review underneath the state coordinated review process. Now, currently, there's only 2 counties within the state of Florida that has rural land stewardship areas. That's Collier County and St. Lucie County. So what would an RLSA comprehensive plan amendment consist of? It consists of 3 major things. Criteria for designated stewardship receiving areas, SRAs, and stewardship sending areas, or SSAs. Now, SSAs and SRAs are being used here to guide development to more appropriate places while protecting agricultural lands and activities, as well as other traditional rural land uses in the natural environment itself. The plan amendment itself will also contain innovative planning and development strategies and associated implementation processes regarding the functional land uses and other stewardship functions. The plan amendment would consist of a mixture of densities which would discourage urban sprawl and protect natural resources. In total, this comprehensive plan amendment is supposed to promote rural land stewardship areas and protect the rural lands, as well as stimulate economic growth and diversification of the economy. Now, the slide before you, you're going to see is an example of an RLSA map from Collier County. And as I identified previously on the slide, there are some main components of an RLSA. There's the SRAs, SSAs, and what's called setting area stewardship credits, which are associated with the SSAs. So, as I said, these credits are obtained from SSAs, which enables development to occur in SRAs. And these credits are determined by a credit worksheet that's developed by the local government. Now, you're looking on your screen, you're noticing that the SRA here is Ave Maria. You notice that seems to be incredibly urbanized compared to the other sending areas. So this is showing how, this map is showing how Collier County is protecting these other areas for natural resources and agricultural uses and placing urban uses in a more appropriate area to allow for the economy to continue on without being detrimented by fracturing or what have you. And on the bottom of this slide, you'll see it when you get a handout for this presentation, is a link to Collier County's example that I'm showing on the screen. Now, another example from Collier County, as I was alluding to, is the stewardship credit worksheet. And this worksheet tells the applicant basically what kind of credits you could get for what type of areas they're spending development from for density and intensity purposes. And this is an example of a study area. You have to do a significant amount of data analysis associated with a rural land stewardship area, and that is detailed in the handbook. And one of the things is basically making note of the natural resources that you'll be looking at in terms of developing your stewardship sending areas. Finally, I will end on section 3.9.5 of chapter 3. And that is planning innovation. So in House Bill 7207 in 2011, section 163.31.68 got encouraged and updated. Within this section, the legislature wanted to promote innovative planning tools and also required DAO to coordinate with agencies to provide technical assistance to local governments that are trying to use these innovative planning tools. Innovative planning tools identified by the statute include but are not limited to visioning, sector planning, and rural land stewardship area designation. Other planning innovations that examples that you can see now in terms of coordination, such as the FDOT's multimodal mobility review planning guide and FDOT's multimodal transportation best practices and model elements.